Everyone, so I want to welcome, we have a special guest today. We have a gentleman, John Ferrigan, who I met a few weeks ago, who had reached out to me about possibly sharing his story of recovery. And I invited him to come in, let me hear a little bit about it, and I was extremely moved by what he had to share. And so I thought it would be great to give him an opportunity to kind of share his story, overcoming trauma and other obstacles in his life to get to where he is today. He has his wife Mary Ann with us today, so appreciate you coming as well. And I'm going to give John a little plug too, and he'll probably plug more, but John's actually going to help teach a class next session called Land That Job. So anybody who's thinking about possibly going back to work, whether it be part-time, full-time, or even just thinking about it, I encourage you to sign up for John's class. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome John Ferrigan. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that. And thank you all so much for being here. I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. I know I might at some point be standing between everybody here and some pizza, so I'll try and make this as succinct as I possibly can for you guys. I do, as Chris said, want to tell you a story about how I have been living with and trying to overcome mental illness in some form for the last 40 years of my life. There might be parts of this story that might be hard for some folks to hear, and if that's the case, I absolutely understand. It's a bit of a difficult story, but I will say we generally have happy endings for most of the things I'm going to tell you, so do try and keep that in mind if you hear something that's a little bit hard to hear. As I said, I've been working with mental illness or living with mental illness for about 40 years. About 9 years ago, I weighed over 280 pounds. I was a full-blown alcoholic. I chewed 2 cans of snuff a day. I dipped 2 cans of snuff a day, and I drank 6 liters of diet soda every single day. And I'm here to tell you that I don't do any of those things anymore. But let me start at the beginning. 40 years ago, a few weeks before my 9th birthday, and my mother lost her mind. She destroyed our house with a hammer, with knives, and with paint. Everything we had was completely destroyed. It was in service of trying to kill herself and kill the life of my infant sister at the time. I came home when I discovered this after school, and the toaster was in the tub. She had tried to electrocute the 2 of them, and that didn't work, fortunately. But every inch of our house was shattered. Every inch of our life was shattered. When she couldn't succeed with the bathtub, she took the car that we had and drove out to the country, and at high speed, over 100 miles an hour, drove into a stand of trees in an effort again to try and take her and my sister's life. Fortunately, again, they both survived. But my mother spent 99 days in the hospital. Now, to tell you how different the world was in 1979 than it is today, that cost my father $0. Can you imagine what something like that would cost someone today? Different world, different time. But it was during this 99 days that I really learned how to be invisible in front of my parents, be invisible in front of my mother. Because I never knew what I was going to come home to as a child. I didn't know if I was going to come home to a body or bodies. I didn't know if I was going to come home to more destruction. I didn't know if I was going to come home to my mother being completely tranquilized out of her mind, because back then the medications that were available were pretty much a hammer. It was you're either tranquilized or you are not on medication. And so she would try off and on throughout the years to take the medication that was available, didn't like the results, and so she would go off the medication. So it was a constant cycle of up and down. And it was a constant cycle, too, of her berating me, or telling me how much she didn't like me, or telling me how much she wished I was never born. That was the constant backdrop of my childhood. The constant communication and chatter I got from my parents was how much they disliked me. Give you an example. When I decided I wanted to play football as a boy, my mother's first response was, "You'll never make it playing football." I'm going to tell you that right now. And so I managed to play football for 5 years, and I became captain of my team at some point. So I learned also how to use spite to overcome the challenges that I had at my house. Because that's what my parents taught me, was spite. They were spiteful towards me. They let me know that anything I needed was an inconvenience. They let me know that having to take me to practice as a kid was something they didn't want to do. And they'd leave me at practice sometimes too, until well after dark, because, we have to go get the kid. We kind of forgot about that. That was the kind of thing that happened all throughout my childhood. And as the medications got a little bit better, my mother got a little bit better. But there were times when, there was a time I came home one day and I made her angry and she was frying up some beef on the stove, and she took that frying pan full of beef and she dumped it out and she swung it at me, and she missed me about that much and chased me out of the house. And again, I hate you, I wish you were never born. That was pretty much the common refrain I got. So by the time I was 18 years old, I left my parents' home pretty much rudderless. I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. I knew I was going to go to college. They had drilled that into me. I knew I had to work hard. They had drilled that into me too, fortunately. But I spent 2 years drinking myself stupid and not really preparing myself for life. And that is when I thought I had a lifeline. I met my first wife. She was 4 years older than me, and she seemed a bit wiser than I was, at least as a 19-year-old. But what I realized, I thought I was leaving the frying pan for better pastures, and actually ended up in a bigger fire with my first wife. She again turned out to be very much like my mother, which I guess kind of makes sense. We sort of seek out in our parent, in our worst, what's in our worst parent somehow is how the story goes, and I most certainly did that. My first wife was mean-spirited. She was cruel, and she took out all of her insecurities on me and projected all of the things about herself she didn't like onto me. And so she would frequently just tell me what a loser I was. You're such a loser. You're so pathetic. But I was dealing with things. I never really dealt with the trauma that I had dealt with as a child. I didn't take any kind of medication. I didn't go see any kind of professional help because I was a 19, 20-year-old kid. It was something I refused to do. But I stayed with her, and because it wasn't home. It wasn't with my parents. It was an improvement over what I had, at the very least. So I was married at 22, and I had a child by the time I was 23. I had no business having a child at 23. I had no business being married at 22, but nonetheless, that's what happened. The next major incident that took place, well, I guess let me take a step back. My ex-wife and I moved across state lines 5 times in the span of 3 years in service of my job. I worked for NCR, I'm up in Dayton, but I worked down south. So we had no way to ground ourselves. She worked night shift. She worked waiting tables while I worked the day shift. So we grew increasingly apart and spent less and less time together. And both of us were hurting from the lack of family, the lack of support, the lack of anything as we were raising a small child. In November of 1995, my mother made the second attempt on her life. She went to the gas station one day and she bought 10 gallons of gasoline. And by this point in time, my parents were living down in South Carolina. I was in Virginia. My mother got 10 gallons of gasoline and poured it all over every inch of their house and stood in the middle of it and lit a match. They lost everything we had. Everything was gone. Now she, of course, her survival instinct overtook and she ran out of the fire. But for the second time, my father had lost everything he had because my mother wanted to kill herself. And as part of the shock, as part of dealing with this, my mother made this sort of half-hearted attempt to cut her jugular vein with a hanger. And it was that time that I sort of realized that that toaster in the tub might have just been a cry for help as opposed to something she genuinely thought she was going to accomplish. So it was about this time that my first wife really started to completely distance herself from me. She didn't want anything to do with me. And that's when my father finally said enough with my mother, and they got divorced. And I was happy with that. It was the right thing for them to do. My sister was a teenager at the time down south. It was very hard for her in a very small town in South Carolina to be that kid of the crazy woman who burned their house down. So she had a lot of struggles to deal with herself. She's 8 years younger than I am, of course. And my mother moved back to Dayton. My father stayed in South Carolina. And the other hallmark of my childhood was my father would spend hours trying to talk my mother out of killing herself. He would spend hours trying to explain to her the way the world really was. But my mother was paranoid schizophrenic and manic depressive at the time, bipolar. So it would become these hour-long sessions of just talking in circles that all are about, you shouldn't kill yourself, and you have a reason to live, and we want you to live. Please, please don't kill yourself. And after my parents divorced and my mother moved back, she took all that energy that she had and she focused it on me. And so I would spend hours on the phone after work talking to my mother, trying to convince her, please, please don't kill yourself. Please don't do this. You have a reason to live. Find a job. Be with your friends. You can come visit us. We can come visit you. Please, please stay alive. And the conversations would always end the same. And they became exhausting after time because I'm living with someone I don't want to be living with. I'm trying to raise my daughter with someone who doesn't necessarily have my daughter's best interest at heart, as I'll tell you in a bit. And I'm really struggling. So by the end of 1995, I'd had enough. I couldn't babysit my mother. I couldn't try and take care of my child. I couldn't keep a job and be fighting with my ex-wife at all times with no help. And I finally, one time, said to my mother, I said, you know what, Mom? You need to just go ahead and do it. You need to get it over with. I can't do this with you anymore. I don't want you to kill yourself, but I'm not going to talk to you about this anymore. And it was the last conversation I had with her. Fast forward to February of 1996, and my mother went down to her lawyer and she changed her will. She gave 75% of everything she had to my sister. She gave 25% to me, and she left me her Cadillac. Not long after that, she pulled that Cadillac into the car, she closed the garage door, and she ran a hose from the exhaust to the driver's window. And ran a full tank of gas out of that car. And they didn't find her body for about 5 days. And it was uncomfortably warm that time of year, that February actually. So you can imagine the condition of this automobile after her body sat in there for 5 days. And I got the phone call from my ex-wife, and she said, I was at work when I heard, and she said, you need to come home immediately. You need to come home right now. And I said, what's going on? Tell me what happened. She said, I can't. You just need to come home. And I immediately knew what had happened. I knew she had finally succeeded where she had failed so many times before. And I felt relief. I didn't feel guilt about that conversation. I didn't feel remorse because I was at a place where I had to learn how to survive and overcome her mental illness while I was dealing with my own mental illness. So we drove through the night and we made it to Dayton, and I'm in the funeral home and I'm picking out my mother's casket. And I'm 25 years old, and having lost sleep and having not been awake for more than 24, 27 hours, I was laughing maniacally as I'm trying to pick out a casket because this is the most absurd moment of my life. Why am I picking out my mother's casket? I shouldn't be doing this. This is insane. We made it through the ceremonies. We made it through the sharing of the will. We got all our paperwork in order. And I had sent my wife and daughter back home to North Carolina, where we lived at the time. And I had to drive that car home to North Carolina. And I spent 10 hours behind the wheel of the instrument my mother used to take her life and bequeathed to me as one final last gesture to just let me know how much she hated me. I can't describe to you what that automobile smelled like. I can't describe to you what it felt like to sit in that chair for 10 hours. But I didn't have any choice because I didn't have any money and I had to sell that car to get a little bit of money. So it's about this time where I'm hurting more than any point I have in my entire life. And my ex-wife decides that she's kind of pretty much done with me. She's had enough. She provided me no solace. She provided me no support. She provided me no assistance as I went through the grieving process. And she said, you just need to get over it. Let's go have some fun. She wanted to push it under the rug and pretend like it never happened, which I guess there are some elements I can understand. You want to push nightmares under the rug. You don't want to deal with nightmares. But it was about this time that I realized that I couldn't live with this woman anymore. She wasn't in this for anything but herself. So her father helped underwrite her entire divorce process, and they found the best lawyers in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I picked a name out of a phone book. And I remember going into this woman's office, and she said, are you sure you want to work with me? I usually work with women. I don't ever work with men. I said, well, I'm here, and I don't want to go through anybody else, so let's just go ahead and do this. So you can imagine the way the divorce ended up. My wife got primary custody. My wife got every dime I had, just about it seemed at the time, but I was just happy to be away from her. And I was more concerned mostly about my daughter's well-being, even though I didn't have the wherewithal to fight her in court over it. So I stayed in Raleigh for another year, and she would just bring my daughter to me, and drop her off on my doorstep whenever she felt like it. The court order be damned. So I had to stay around. I had to be in Raleigh. I worked out of my own home. I had no friends. I didn't know anybody in Raleigh, but I stayed for my daughter. And the divorce was extremely acrimonious. And I finally realized all these years later that my ex-wife and I spent more time hating each other than we did loving our daughter, because we just were at each other's throats with this whole thing. I finally, after a year of living in Raleigh, gave up the state of North Carolina tour, and I found a job down in South Carolina. And that's where I was able to meet my beautiful wife that Chris introduced a little bit earlier. And I began living my life, and I swept all of what happened in my childhood under the rug, and I tried to just live my life as men are wont to do, right? Men struggle. Men are stoic. Men must be stoic. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to gut it out. But over the course of the next couple of years, trying to raise my daughter became more difficult, because she started showing signs of, first it manifested as ADHD, then it started manifesting as nonstop aggression at school. And I remember one time I tried to buy her a dog, little dog, and I had it in a cage. I had gone into the bathroom to take a shower, and I left her out there, and I come out, and she's spraying Windex in the dog's eye. Has it cornered, and she's torturing the damn animal. Jesus, I mean, there's something wrong here. So Mary and I moved back to North Carolina to be in the same city with her mother, so we could help take care of her and help raise her, and she turned around immediately. She started becoming successful in school. She started having fewer incidents of aggression and problems in school, and we did it. Mary was helping me raise my daughter, and she was successful. But this is 2000, and the dot-com bubble had burst, and both of us lost our jobs in North Carolina. So she is from the other side of Ohio, I'm from Dayton, and we wanted to get back closer to her family here, and so we moved back to now Cincinnati. And the cycle began again with my daughter. She would get in trouble at school. She became sexualized far too early. She was aggressive all the time and fighting with children. So we tried to coax my ex-wife into letting her come live with us. And of course, the cycle would turn around again, and she would become successful again. She would be good grades. She would have friends. She would be involved in positive things. And my ex-wife would decide for some reason she wanted to pull her back. And that cycle went around for 2 or 3 years. And that's when my daughter's spiral really began. Sometime around 2004, 2005, she got involved with an internet predator. And this man convinced her to allow him to take pictures of her as dogs, our dogs, lick peanut butter off of her genitals. And the police came and they read me that story. And they read me the exchange that had happened with this man. The good news, they found this man. This man is now in prison. He will be in prison for the next 20 years. So, it's horrible. After that happened, her mother took her back to North Carolina, because we clearly were unfit parents. And a year later, she was sneaking out one night, as kids do. She snuck out her window with a friend, someone she thought was her friend. But it turned out it was an MS-13 gang initiation. She was gang raped and sodomized as part of that MS-13 initiation. She was 14 years old. It was at this time that we absolutely knew we had to do something to rescue her from herself. And so, at the advice of professionals, we had her put into a residential care facility down in Alabama. Now, health insurance doesn't cover long-term mental illness. At least the insurance I had didn't. So I liquidated whatever I had in my retirement plan. I liquidated whatever I had in her college fund, which wasn't much. And then I had to add an additional almost $250,000 to pay for this. And she was in that facility for 18 months. And we would go down and visit her on a monthly basis. And she would show signs of improvement, show signs that she was getting it, show signs that she understood. And at the end of that 18 months, she came back home and she came and lived with us. Now we are completely financially strapped. I am drinking constantly, and I am depressed like you cannot believe. I could barely function. At some point when she was back, she was back and she was going to Lakota East High School, where we live out that way, and she couldn't make friends. She was damaged, and the kids knew it, and they circled her like sharks, and they picked on her relentlessly. And at one point, the kids were picking on her so bad they would bark at her. Somebody had spread the word at school that this kid had something about dogs, and they would bark at her. They would pick at her and attack her nonstop. And I finally said, you know what, Emma? The next time that happens, I don't care who it is, you kick the hell out of them. I don't give a damn who it is. One day later, some boy had decided out of the blue that it was his turn to pick on her. And she beat the living hell out of him. And I went up and I visited with the principal, of course, after the fact. And he said, well, you know, we're going to have to suspend your daughter for being in this fight. And I said, well, what's going to happen to the kid that attacked her? That made fun of her, that started the whole thing? Oh, well, nothing's going to happen to him. It's the world we lived in at that point in time. And at this point in time, we realized that there was nothing else we could do. She couldn't go to that school. I had no more financial wherewithal to help her with other solutions. We got involved with Butler County Wraparound, and we had to put her into an orphanage out in Claremont County. And she stayed there until she was 18 years old. I can't, again, describe to you the heartbreak that's involved with putting your daughter into an orphanage because you can't control her anymore. You can't be of service to her anymore. You can't help her anymore. It broke my heart. And they could only keep her until she was 18. And so when she was 18, they did at least hook her up with an efficiency up in Middletown. Being the kind of kid she is, she's been through all of these things, and to this day her heart is as big as a whale. And she's such a good kid still. She's been through all these horrible things, and that's the good news side of it that I'll get to in a minute. But she moved into this efficiency, and eventually she ended up living there. She allowed 2 heroin junkies and their children to move in with her. So 5 people are living in an efficiency, and they are stealing everything they possibly can from her. The next couple of years in her life, she bounced around between women's shelters and living on couches and couch surfing with people because we knew she couldn't come live with us. We couldn't do it. We were raising our son. My son is now 12, and we feared for his life being around her, so we didn't let her near him. We didn't let her near us. And again, at this time, I'm spiraling out of control because I got no money. I'm an alcoholic, and all the things I was telling you. So in 2011, one night, I went on a bender and swallowed every pill I had in my medicine cabinet because I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't face any of this stuff anymore. And obviously I'm standing here in front of you, so I did survive that event. I came to about 36 hours after I had done this, and it was this point, that was rock bottom for me. I knew I had to change something about, if I've survived this, there must be some sort of reason. And that's when the turnaround in my life really began, finally, was hitting rock bottom. I went to the rehab center just around the corner over here. I went through rehab. And I had all these things about myself that I hated. I hated being that overweight. I hated being an alcoholic. I hated putting that crap in my mouth constantly because I knew all these things were going to kill me. It was all combining to kill me, and I had to change something. And so in rehab, it was alcohol first. It was the first thing. Now, I was a binge drinker. I wasn't one of those kind of people that has to have a drink to function. But I was heading in that direction for sure. I was binge drinking 4 and 5 nights a week. And by binge drinking, I mean drinking until I blacked out. Then get up and go to work the next day. That takes its toll on you after a while. But I made it through rehab, and I hung on to sobriety. I hung on to it as hard as I could. I hung on to it with everything I had. And then I started on the next thing. The next thing I started on was losing weight. I'd been heavy since I left high school because I learned how to eat like a football player, and I wasn't playing football. And that's another thing. It just took time. It took time. Our friend over here just lost 29 pounds recently. Congratulations to you, sir. Anyone who's struggled with their weight knows what that struggle is like. It's extremely hard. But having learned through conquering alcohol that I could conquer something that hard, the weight loss thing was a little bit easier. It was just a little bit easier than it was to stop the alcohol. And I lost 79 pounds somehow. And after I lost that weight, I realized, I think I found the key to do this. I think I have what it takes to quit that tobacco now. And one weekend I told my wife, I said, honey, I'm going to be a complete bastard for this entire weekend because I'm going to quit this mess. And she said, okay. She gave me the space to do it. And I spent one weekend as the angriest man that's ever walked the planet. But I did survive. And I was able to keep that streak going, that one day at a time mantra that they have from Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what worked for me. One day at a time. And then finally the last thing was the diet soda. 6 liters a day. Now, I was completely addicted to this. It was the only way I got caffeine. That was the hardest one of them all. But there again, I was able to learn what it took for me to be able to quit something. So that's my silver lining, I guess I would give to you guys, is I had tried to destroy myself after I'd been through all these things that tried to destroy me. And I came out the other end of it. Now my daughter, she now lives with us. She just got her high school diploma. She's got a job now that's going to help pay for her associate's degree. And she's really starting to turn her life around. And they'll all happen for one reason. I expected my daughter's life to be like my life. You will work hard and you'll get good grades. You will be a productive citizen in this world. You will have a job, you will get an education, and you will survive. You will take care of yourself. And that was my expectation for her from birth until last Christmas. And she said to me one day, she said, Dad, all I want to do is be happy. I just want to be happy. And that hit me like a bolt out of the blue. That's what we all want. We all just want to be happy. And I changed for her. I changed my expectations for her. I changed how I dealt with her. I felt so much anger towards her for all the things that had happened, all the tumult in our life. And we're still almost bankrupt, but we're okay. We're doing better. We get a little bit better every day. So if you have things about yourself that you might not like, I think we all do. If you have a big laundry list of those things, my message to you is pick one thing and fight like hell. Grab onto it and fight like hell. Because you overcome one thing about yourself that you don't like, just one, you now have the key to start on that second thing. I think we all tend to, I don't know, I'll say for myself, I tend to look at all the things about everything that I don't like, and now it is a catastrophe, and it all seems insurmountable. But learning how to pick one thing, and doggedly focus on that until it's done, gives you the strength you need for the next thing. And then you can start overcoming multiple things. And as I stand here before you today, again, I've lost the weight, I don't drink, I don't use tobacco, and I don't use diet soda anymore. So that's what I have to say to you. I thank you all for being here. Does anyone have questions? I guess Chris said there might be some questions. So
I got
yeah, go ahead, please.
question too. In regards to the weight loss,
Yeah.
was there any one or two things in particular that really helped you kind of turn the corner to where you said, hey, this is working, and I see this working, and it helped you take those 79 pounds off?
So we had a friend who had lost quite a bit of weight, and she used a system that's called MetaFast. Okay, and it's these prepackaged meals. And it's about the amount of food that you would feed a bird. I think it was very, very small portions. And I spent a lot of time being very, very hungry. Because I had been at a place where I would gorge myself. I'd sit down and I would eat pounds of food in one sitting. Deep fried, bad food that is terrible for you. So my stomach was completely distended, and I had learned just to eat and then even eat after I'm full. So it was the combination of that MetaFast program and their food, but also learning how to eat differently. I used to have a gigantic breakfast, and I would have a gigantic lunch, and then I would have a gigantic dinner and a gigantic dessert. And so your body goes through all those peaks and valleys. And what I learned is you have to have smaller meals and then have a small snack in between. Small snacks that are low in calories, but just enough to keep your metabolism going and keep you feeling as though you're not going to completely blow your stack because you're starving. And that's what I learned. And so we were on the MetaFast for, I don't know, 6 months maybe tops. And then we learned how to change what we cook. We learned how to change what we eat. We used to eat a lot of packaged foods. We used to eat a lot of frozen stuff out of the frozen cabinet. We learned we need to cook for ourselves, and we need to. I don't know if anybody's heard this, but basically the adage that I've heard is when you're at the grocery store, you should stay on the outside. You should stay where the produce is. You should stay where the bakery and the meat and milk and dairy, and avoid the things in the middle, because that's where all that prepackaged food is. It's easy, and I get it. We did it ourselves. I mean, we were in survival mode for so long. And we didn't know, we just, hey, it's easy, and it was comfort food, and we had other things going on. But that was the other key to it too, was learning how to just have really meats and vegetables. Avoid things that are high in carbs and pastas and those kinds of things. So I think that was the big thing. The other thing I will tell you is I wasn't exercising through that either. I didn't do that with exercise. It was purely done in the kitchen. So. Hi, yeah, please.
What day and time is your land that job class?
It's on Thursdays at 10:40, 10:30?
Wait a minute,
Weight loss is 10:30, 11:45.
it's either 10:30 or 11:45. I have to
That'd be
look at the
11:40.
schedule.
But it's on Thursday?
It's on Thursdays.
Yeah, it's on Thursday. I want to say it's at 10:30 because I guess the other thing I didn't really talk about is I am now medicated. I have a psychiatrist that I work with, and I've been able to work with a therapist that really has helped me immensely. That is the best money that I spent. I can't always afford it every month, but that's the best money I've ever spent in my life is getting in therapy and talking with someone. But so I say that because I know I generally have my therapist at noon on Thursdays. So is it 10:30?
10:30 is
10:30
correct.
it is, okay.
Thank you, Emily, for that schedule. That was good.
Yeah, I look forward to anybody that's coming. I mean, we're going to talk about things like just filling out job applications and preparing yourself to have a phone interview, and preparing yourself to go meet someone in person to talk about a job. And if anyone's ready, we could talk about resumes. We could talk about looking for jobs and how to find jobs and other ways that you can get yourself prepared to get out there in the job market. And we'll do mock interviews, and we can really, I'm going to tailor it to everybody that's in the class, but I want to help everybody get themselves prepared to get out there and get working. So.
I'm curious, but from the audience, but just maybe a show of hands, how many people can relate to, maybe in your own life, one of the traumas or struggles that John and his family went through, whether it be weight loss, alcohol, the abuse? I was going to say, I thought your message might hit home with almost 70 to 80% of the audience.
I hope
It looks
so.
like it has. So.
It's, y'all, listen, that's one of the things when I discovered what's going on here. I only met Chris 3 weeks ago. And we talked about that class, and I can't wait to come down here and be a part of what y'all are doing down here. I know personally, not everyone's individual struggle, but I know some of the things you deal with. I know what the stigma is like. Because let me tell you, with my daughter, there were times when I said to myself, I wish she had cancer. God, I wish she had cancer. Because when somebody has cancer, everybody comes running. They come running to help. They want to be there to help you in any way. They'll bring you meals. They'll watch your dog. They'll watch your house. They'll get your mail. They'll do anything they can to help you because someone in your family has cancer. When someone has mental illness, people are nowhere to be found. Sometimes it's your family too that's not there to be found either, right? And y'all, there's no difference. The struggle with mental illness to me is worse than cancer, because there's a cure for cancer in a lot of cases. There are things that people can do to overcome cancer, and they get help. Mental illness, you're on your own. I lucked out in who I married. My wife has been my rock. She's been my granite. She's helped me through everything. And if you don't have that too, and that's a lot of it's a testament to her, because she is good and she is pure. And she had a completely different upbringing from mine, but we both grew up with those kind of Midwestern values. But that being alone in the struggle is the part that I found is the hardest. I remember there was one time she had gone out and done something, I don't know what in the world it was, but the sheriff brought her back home by the scuff of her collar, and he looks me right in the eye and he says, "You should hit this kid more. If you hit this kid more, she's going to stop doing all this kind of nonsense." And her father said the same, and my father said the same. "Why aren't you hitting this kid?" And it dawned on me, nobody ever says to a parent of a child with cancer, if you hit this kid, they're going to have a lot less cancer. But they say it about a kid that has mental illness. It's a completely different animal. But having a community here like this, to be a part, if I can be a part of that and somehow help folks, it would make my life. I would really like to help everybody any way I can, because the darkness of mental illness is, I don't have words. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Anything else?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you for listening. Please?
I said, thank you for sharing your story. It's been dynamic. And I'm
Oh,
very
wait too much.
proud of you.
Oh, thank you so much. That means the world to me. That means the world to me. Thank you. Yeah. It can, one step at a time, one thing at a time. So.
I'm glad it had a happy ending.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't be here if it was a happy ending. If there wasn't a happy ending, I mean, yeah, I have to come here. I want to deliver hope. I want to deliver a message of hope and empathy and understanding. So, and it's not, my story's not written either. I'm not done yet. I got a lot more to do. So, I'm sorry.
Have you thought about writing your testimony to share it outside of here?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I've started on a book. My wife and I are working through that together on a book proposal right now. It's the thing about it is some of it is a bit cathartic, but it's also hard to go back to those places and relive and try and remember what was like. The thing like with the house when I was 8 years old, that smell, I'll never forget that smell. That car, the same thing. But it's gut-wrenching to do, and I work over at GE full time, so making the time to do it is where I get into the challenge. But she's going to start cracking the whip on me. So yes, I'm planning to write a book about it. For sure.
Thanks for sharing that today.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.